Welcome everyone to MACFEST 2024. Wherever you're joining us from, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, assalamu alaikum. Please tell us in the chat where you're sitting in the world. My name is Katarzyna, I'm a member of the MACFEST team. And today we've got a very special event. It's another highlight of MACFEST 2024. This time it's the highlight of the Festival of Words and Books. It's an event on diversity, equality, inclusion, freedom of expression. It's a continuation in a way from our yesterday's event. It was the highlight of Muslim Women's Arts Festival with an award-winning journalist, filmmaker and writer, Dr. Miriam Francois. If you've missed it, you can watch it on Facebook. Now, this is a second special collaboration with Manchester Lit PhilSociety, which is over 250 years old. And we are delighted to host an In Conversation event with another strong and inspirational figure, the one and only multi-award-winning journalist, author, radio and TV broadcaster, commentator, Professor Yasmin Alibhai-Brown. The event is hosted by the Manchester Lit PhilSociety's former president, Ian Cameron, who started as a civil engineer and spent many years on building things all around the world, and later became a specialist in consultancy and delivery of exceptional professional performance and successful business outcomes, enriching every organization he's been working with. So welcome everyone. Just quickly, I'd like to say thank you on behalf of MACFEST for all your donations that help us create all these wonderful events for you. Most of them are free. Subscribe to our newsletter, follow MACFEST on our social media, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and TikTok. Use the hashtag #SpreadHoneyNotHate and MACFEST 2024. And today, please share your comments, your thoughts, any questions you might have, either in the Q&A portal or in the chat. We do want you to get involved in the conversation today. Over to you, Ian.
Well, thank you, Katarzyna. Thanks again to MACFEST for this kind invitation. You were brave enough to give me the opportunity last year to have a go at hosting an event, and the fact you've come back for a second year just, I think, is it's a credit to your continuing bravery. It's a real pleasure for me today, pleasure and a privilege to have the opportunity for a conversation with Yasmin Alibhai-Brown. Yasmin needs no introduction from me. We know her very, very well, all of us. But I'm going to try and give her a very, very brief summary of a life that, if we explored it in full, I think would keep us here till this evening. She is, of course, an internationally acclaimed journalist and author. We all know her from her work for the I newspaper, the Evening Standard, and possibly even more from her regular appearances on the TV and the radio. She's a frequent and powerful commentator on immigration, diversity, multiculturalism, among other topics. And she's had quite a journey to reach this position. Grew up, I should say, first of all in Uganda. Took her first English degree at Makerere University in Uganda. Then came over to the UK and did her MPhil at Oxford. And what a stellar career! She's a renowned journalist, a New Statesman, contributor to The Guardian, Observer, New York Times, and Time Newsweek magazines. She's been a researcher, significantly, I think, with the, if I remember it well, the PPR during the New Labour days, and as a part of the Foreign Policy Centre, honorary fellow at my hometown, Liverpool John Moores University, a visiting professor at Cardiff, Lincoln Unis, among others. And interestingly, has received and returned, I think, an MBE. So And I should mention also co-founded the charity British Muslims for Secular Democracy, which has a great role to play in these somewhat troubled days. So, in summary, she speaks her mind. She's not unacquainted with controversy, so I think we can all look forward to an interesting afternoon. So, Yasmin, we're going to have a conversation, I think, about the future of Britain, an image of the new Britain. But just as a starting point, I'm interested in hearing a little bit about the author side of your multifaceted career. I've been preparing myself with dipping into what I think was your latest publication, Ladies Who Punch. It's a celebration of feminism, culture, art, activism, all that good stuff. You say some quite rude things about pale, male, stale people, but I'm just going to gloss over that. Book had great reviews, and it's a really nice format, 50 or so interviews with a really interesting selection of women, some of them quite well known, others not so famous, but you've pulled them out of the shadows and demonstrated the influence they've had on our life today. Let's start the ball rolling with a question that I find interesting. You have so much going on in your life. But you return to authorship, the production of books, and they're all very different as far as I can see. What is it that drives you in that direction? And maybe say a little bit about the process of somebody who's been trying for the last 20 years to get my first novel past the second chapter. I'm really interested to hear how the process works, the frustrations and the joys. So tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you for that intro, Ian, and thank you, MACFEST. I did the first ever, I think, MACFEST festival in person, and I really didn't think that it would survive and grow the way it has done. So well done to all caterers, especially the person who brought it up. It's been an interesting life. I've been in this country 50 years as an immigrant, and the title says something that is key to my answer that I'm going to give you, Ian. There is a very interesting space that some of us occupy in whatever country we live in, which is the insider outlier space. You're on that line, you're standing on that line, partly part of the wider society, but partly with a skeptical eye about that society. So when there are so many people who hate me in this country and say I'm not a patriot, they're right. I'm not a patriot. I wouldn't be a patriot of any country I lived in. I think it was Samuel Johnson who said patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. So in a sense, they're quite right to say I am not a patriot, because a patriot is an insider. But at the same time, I'm not an outsider, because I feel very, very, very deeply rooted in my city, if nothing else, but also in some ways in England. In one of the books I wrote before this one was a kind of completely different history of England from the one that has been written so far, in that England, I do mean England, has always had a very complicated relationship with the East. It's a little bit of an argument with Edward Said, whom I did know personally, because this idea of the Orientalist mindset is absolutely there, and his book was very, very important. But I don't think it fully described the complicated relationship between England and the East. So I feel very much like this person who's embedded but never ever deaf, blind or dumb like those three monkeys. Yeah, I have to see what I see. And with books, it's been the same thing, in that whoever you are, you know, whether I hope you don't think, Ian, that I was slagging off white pale men. I was slagging off brown horrible men and black horrible men in this book as well. But the idea that you have this sort of mindset which won't accept received wisdom or a way of being or a way of thinking confuses people. It confuses them, because one day I might be saying, like this week I said in my column, I think we should, our politics is so controlled now by the duopoly of Labour and the Tories that we're not a democracy anymore. And so in my column I said, why don't we, if we had 50 independent members in Parliament, in the Commons, we have them in the Lords, 25% of the Lords is crossbench, they would not be bullied or whipped, and we would not have the situation we have at present, the abomination that neither party is able to call for a ceasefire in Gaza as kind of a massacre occurs. So it went, our readers have gone crazy about it because they hadn't thought about it. So it's, what I'm saying is that thinking out beyond the labels and what the expectations of people are can both be a gift and a curse. And with books, it's been very interesting because the books are all very different. Frankly, I get bored. I get bored of doing anything similar over and over again. But I was talking to Katerina earlier that, of course, publishers are lazy. They just want the same old, same old. And if I was writing a recipe book, I wouldn't write the same old recipe. So why would I write? And it's always a struggle to get them to understand what I want to write about. So when I wrote Who Do We Think We Are, which is a look at the British nation, what it is and the mirrors it looks into, oh my God, they just couldn't understand what I was talking about. And that book did really well, both here and in America. Then when they said, and I said to them, I want to write a food memoir. I know I'm a journalist. I know I'm very political. I know I do question. I actually want to write about food. Well, my goodness, that took a year for them to get into their heads. Why would you want to write about food? What do you know about food? And I think for people listening, one of the things in this postmodern world we live in is that you can think and be a different person and do a different thing. And that's a joy. You know, we're no longer expected to follow a script that is written by history. And writing these books, so in some, is a struggle because it takes so long to persuade people. But I know I'm on question time, but I want to write love stories, and they can't get their heads around that. But that's what I think this insider outlier gift or curse is all about.
Thank you for that. That's quite an insight. It takes us beyond the issues of writing books and much more into the impact that your arrival in the UK and growing up in the UK has had upon you, and that's something I think that we can explore over the next period of the conversation. Is before we leave books though, is there anything to be said about the process of book production? I know we have, you mentioned Katharina, and that's Katharina Bielenberg, of course, who is going to join us for an interlude at the halfway point of this chat. Is there anything to be said from the author's point of view that reflects on the process and how it could be how it could be more attractive, because the more we hear from a wider range of people, it's got to be the better. You know, in these days of social media, it's such a pleasure to get your nose into a proper book and read something from cover to cover and have the time to digest and to reflect. It would be great to see more people taking on the challenge and delivering. Is there anything you can comment on in that regard?
Well, I mean, one of my, as I said, one of my struggles has been to persuade people that the book I want to write at that moment is worth them considering, because they're thinking about, they think they know me, they think they know what I do, they think they know what I will be tomorrow. And actually, as my mother used to say, you're so strange, I just don't know what you're going to be next. And that's quite right. So in a very kind of often a very cautionary world, conservative actually in some ways, the publishing industry, why would I want to write ladies who punch? Why? Because I'm a woman. I think, you know, there are stories to be told here of women in the past, present day women, and younger women particularly. So the book has 3 parts and all 3 groups are covered. And as you said, Ian, some of these people need to be far better known than they are, women. For example, women were at the forefront of the abolition movement. They raised all the funds for Wilberforce, and Wilberforce was a total sexist. He was good on slavery, but he never allowed these women the space or the respect that they absolutely deserved. And there are 2 women in the book who were these amazing abolitionists who made stirring speeches. And, you know, and when there was a big congress, for example, of the anti-slavery movement here in London, he wouldn't allow, Wilberforce and his gang wouldn't allow women to attend. And in the end, after much pressure, they were allowed to attend, but sit in a corner and not speak. And there's a wonderful painting at the National Gallery of this Congress, where you've got all these men, you know, throwing their arms about and orating, and these women sitting, looking absolutely furious. It's a wonderful painting. So I wanted to uncover some of those stories. You know, the first woman ever in Oxford to be allowed to study law was an Indian woman. And nobody knows her name. Nobody, there's a little bust of her in Lincoln's Inn, but that's it. But then the younger women we have today, I so admire them, because, you know, they're not taking any nonsense. I mean, even though I was part of the second wave of feminism and, you know, we did all that we did, we still conformed much more than the younger generation is. So I wanted to pay them tribute. And, you know, again, there was this, well, why you? And I would say, well, why not? The Exotic England was even more interesting, because I said, look, I don't want, it's not an anti-imperialist book, although I am anti-imperialist. It's a book saying that imperialists, like the Romans, like Mark Antony, when he went to Egypt, go out to dominate and then are seduced by the East. And I want to tell that story, and in particular, how it happened to the English more than the other 3 tribes, if you like, that they went out and they were going to wear their striped suits and hats and not mix. But almost every place they went to, many of them fell in love with the place, the people, they lost their bearings. And I think this is quite an interesting other side of the imperialist story. And they couldn't understand what I was talking about. Either you hate the empire or you defend it. But nobody wanted to explore the in-between. And I feel that about us who were colonized. I grew up in the colony. And I absolutely detested what was going on at a very young age. Very young. I remember watching a Charlie Chaplin film at the age of, or going to see it at the age of 7 on a Saturday morning. And every time you went to the cinema, you had to stand up and sing God Save the Queen. And suddenly that day, I decided I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to stand up. Why should I do this? I've always been like, and so I was thrown out of the cinema, and they didn't even give me my money back. So, so this idea that the empire made me too, as made several other people. I got the gift of the English language, which is the most amazing, expansive, growing language in the world. It taught me to think, if I hadn't been thrown out of Uganda, I would have ended up with a much smaller life. And so they couldn't understand it. And actually, I think it's one of my best books. But because everybody wants to think in terms of pro and against, it's sometimes I think people find me quite difficult. Well, always people find me very difficult.
Thank you. I can relate to that. But progress is a process, isn't it? It depends on people taking a hard stand, but you've got to have more than a hard stand. You've got to be persistent as well, because change will come, but it very, very rarely comes overnight, and you have to be persistent, and that's something you've been. It leads us quite neatly, actually, into the broader picture, I think, of where we're imagining, a new Britain will find itself. You referred to growing up and not standing up for the national anthem in cinema. Well, that's just reminds me that one of my early acts of rebellion as a teenager growing up in the UK was not to stand up for the national anthem, and it was only young kids who did it, but it drew some pretty strong responses from adults at the time. And to be fair, many of them had just been through a world war, so they were very patriotic in a traditional way. But of course, growing up in the UK in the 60s, it was the swinging 60s. Teenagers had just been invented. We were changing the world. We were banning the bomb. We were bringing down apartheid. We were ending the war in Vietnam. We were getting behind the movement in the States, Martin Luther King and his people. It seemed a time of huge change, and there was massive energy as well. I grew up in Liverpool, and we had Beatles and lots of cultural stuff as well springing out at the time. And it just occurs to me, listening to you speak, of course, the swinging 60s. You weren't there. You missed it. You were in a very different life. Well, please tell, because I can't imagine.
It all came to us. It
really?
was like a petrol pipeline. The 60s came to us. So you were either, before that, the 50s came to us with Elvis and Cliff, late 50s.
Yes.
The Beatles, the Stones. We were jiving, we were doing, and then we were wearing op-art dresses and miniskirts, and and our parents were as appalled as the parents here.
Good.
But what was extraordinary was that what we thought of, the white people we knew back there and then, very straight, very organized, very rule-bound, and suddenly there were some Black Americans particularly who came to Uganda during that whole era of the civil rights movement. And we were taught, actually, Makerere was an amazing university. I was taught by Maya Angelou. I had James Baldwin come in to teach us. We had lots and lots of civil rights people coming to Makerere, because Ghana and Uganda were kind of intellectual hubs at the time, and we also had a great awakening about through the Black Civil Rights Movement, which dovetailed with the independence movement. So no, it all came to us. But what I'd never seen until I came here, I'd never seen disheveled white people cleaning the streets. The fag end of the, 72 was the fag end of the 60s. The country was totally on its knees. And those upright English men and women with their hats and stern faces. And here was England that it was just something I'd never imagined. Couples lying around half naked in Hyde Park. And I can't tell you the shock of that this country that ruled the world had turned into a ramshackle brothel or something. I don't know how quite to put it. So it was quite a bit of a shock, because even those of us who were ruled, we always had this admiration, perhaps it was put into our heads, that this was a country of law and order, of propriety, which is why without an army, really, they got to rule the world. So that was the shock, not the 60s, but the early 70s was the big shock for me, I think.
That's interesting. In my imagination, I saw you arriving and being shocked, but for completely different reasons. I assume because you were growing up in a colonial atmosphere that you would be very, protected or hidden from these influences. And it turns out you and I were pretty much on the same side back then. Whether we still are or not, we can discuss that later. But the shock that came to you was the collapse of the old, and that felt at the time as though something that we kids recognized going to do something positive about. So let's have a look at what we have done, because some of it's been really good and some of it's been not so good, and we'll see how the balance pans out by the end of this conversation. Let's look at social structures, because I grew up in the 50s with a very tight family structure within a very small community. Very modest surroundings, but my family were very, very strong. They weren't educated, but I remember my mum and dad had left school at 14, my grandparents probably younger than that. And I made my way by one way or another through school and grammar school and university, all with tremendous encouragement. Nobody had any idea of how to advise me on subjects to take and the routes into profession and the like, but they were full of enthusiastic support. You can do it. If you work hard, you can achieve whatever you want, which was wonderful advice. Didn't always work out, of course, but it stood me in good stead. So that family structure, of course, has to an extent dissipated over the years, and the community in which that family existed. We knew everybody in our community. That's drifted away to a large extent. Are we much more dependent now on governments? It feels as though people expect the government to do stuff that probably in the 50s and 60s, you didn't like governments very much, but you didn't think they had that much control on your life. Religion has changed. Christianity has dwindled away to almost nothing. Islam has been much more vibrant, but of course there's a dark side as well in all religious movement. And the thing that I think has changed more than anything else for me is the arrival of, what can we call them, experts, celebrities, influencers, people who now have an impact on life without seeming to have any particular qualifications for delivering that impact. What's your overview of the change that's taken place in social structures?
Life is change, Ian.
Mm.
Life is change from first minute that humans walked the earth, it was all about change. I have no panic about change at all. And I certainly think that the old ways, the amount of control families had over their young people was a horrendous thing. And I come from a similar community, you know, where family's everything, and you know, the mosque or whoever tells you what to do. And I hated it then, and I hate it now. My children aren't like me at all. And of course I want them to be, but I totally recognize what Khalil Gibran said: your children are not your children. They come through you, but are not of you. Yeah? And I think this idolizing of the family and the church, we saw the damage the churches have done over the years, and the mosques have been similar. I was in mosque on Friday because I was missing my mother so much. My mother was a phenomenal feminist before the word was invented, and I was missing her so much because of Mother's Day coming up. And so I went to mosque, and in my mosque, I'm a Shia Muslim, you know, they kind of don't know what to think of me at all. On the one hand, they all want to take selfies, even in the mosque, because of this same thing that you've referred to. But at the same time, they keep telling me that I'm out of order. And I'm not obedient, and I'm not doing what I should be doing. It's quite a complicated relationship. But I came away thinking, I am so glad that I broke free from all of this. I still go and pray. I don't want to be part of a community. I don't want to be part of a family, because I know what my family did to me. I was almost destroyed, and many, many people are. As for the state, I don't know what your views are. I think the most extraordinary thing about Britain that I love is that they had the imagination after the war to set up a welfare state. This, to me, makes this country priceless in terms of its achievements and its contribution to world history. And you know, people who say, oh, the state is taking control and families are becoming, you know, having too many babies. I have no time for any of that. Okay? Because look at Boris Johnson. He's a baby father. Okay? He's exactly what the black men in particular are called loose baby fathers. But because he's rich, the country thinks it's a big joke. So I think that what is horrible about Britain is its class structure and its continuing tendency towards racism, and the fact that younger people, and that's why I work as a professor, because I love being with younger people, that they don't buy any of this, although they're victims of it, in terms of, you know, who gets the opportunities, who gets the job. How do you get to be a journalist, they ask me. And my answer is, the best way is to have an uncle, father, mother, or aunt in the business, and she'll get you in. My profession is so nepotistic. It's unbelievable, even in the 21st century, okay? So I think that the state, looking after its population, and high tax, like they have in the Scandinavian countries, and there's a lot of research on this, are happier societies for everybody, the rich and the poor. And we've moved so far away from that, ever since Thatcher, that we're now in a position where there are mothers and fathers today stealing milk, tins of milk, because they cannot pay for it in the 7th most rich country in the world. And so if there is to be a future, you know, yesterday there was an international study published that shows Britain is the 2nd most unhappy country in the world. Think about that. Think about that. How did we get here? How did we become? How did we lose our our optimism, and it's a very talented country. It's a very extraordinarily inventive country, and yet, and most of the miserable are young people, not the older generation. The older generation has lived its life and, you know, lived the way it wanted to live. I think, so my answer to you is, the older I get, the more left-wing I become, which is the opposite to what happens to most people. And I said to one group of people, if I could get down on this, you know, sit down and stand up, I would stick my bum onto a street and get in there with the oil protesters, because I agree with them. And I really think there's a lot this country has to offer, but we do have two parties in power at the moment, one in power, one coming into power, who are only serving one section of society, or with the Tories, 1.5 section of society, the very, very, very rich and the upper middle classes, and absolutely failing everybody else. And the fact that so many black and brown people are part of that project doesn't make me feel any the better for it. I don't know if I've expressed this well, but I'm all for a big state, welfare, freedom from your family. They can be supportive, but they cannot control you. And you shouldn't expect your children to be your replicas. Mine aren't. I'm very happy with that.
No, I think that's a great answer. I feel reassured in a way that the rebellious teenager is still rebelling and maybe drifting a bit further into rebellious mode. I think I absolutely agree with you. The biggest tragedy, the biggest failure of the baby boomer generation has been the fact that in attempting to deliver what we've attempted to deliver, we've somehow stretched out society so the gap between rich and poor is growing as we watch, and the prospects for young people for the first time in my long life are worse than they were when I was their age. And maybe not quite as bad as my grandparents' prospects were, but in a way they are, because I think my grandparents had a vision of a place in society and things they could do, whereas the young people now, there's so much despair and very little being offered as a solution. Let's talk about something else that ties in with a number of those threads, not least the fact that our two main political parties seem to have converged. And I think that's, in a way, that's got a lot to do with focus groups. It's got a lot to do with what's going to get me a vote at the next election. I used to enjoy politics when I disagreed wholeheartedly with politicians. But there were many principled politicians in 20, 30, 40 years ago who had a range of views, and somehow out of that conflict, in a ramshackle way, we seem to move forward. Now the convergence comes before the political utterances, and the utterances have a sameness to them. I'm just interested in two things. This came from a conversation with one of our youngest trustees, I think she's in her mid-20s, and somebody who's facing the future with trepidation, let's say. And it's the issue of a green future, sustainable future, compared to consumer-based growth. Now, both parties, and I think almost everybody on the political spectrum, believes broadly that we've got to do things to, limit oil and deliver sustainability and a green and pleasant land. But equally, and sometimes in response to the point you've just been making about how the cost of living, the answer to that is invariably seen across the political spectrum as the need for growth. So we have to drive growth, which effectively means drive capitalism in all its forms, and rich getting richer and all that stuff. Is it where is the balance? Is there a balance? Is it maybe just a choice to make? But how do we manage to strive towards a green future while reminding ourselves that we need to earn money to make everybody better off?
Well, I mean, the answer was there. And Keir Starmer, who's about as changeable as the British weather on a single day, in America and in Canada, they're doing this, that the growth will come through green industry. So, you can use your capitalist model, but use it in a different way to make it a better place for, look, we changed from the way Victorian industrialists were polluting the skies and the air. We moved from there. It didn't stop capitalism, but it reformed it. And this is a great moment to reform capitalism, both in terms of the difference that is extracted from a business entity by the people at the top and the people who actually do the work, the worker bees and the queen bee, if you like. It cannot be that even failing industries, that people at the top get £2 million bonuses, while the people at the bottom cannot get a mortgage. Okay, you can reform and you can create green industries. And the fact that Keir Starmer is so cowardly is one of the great disappointments of my life, because I thought people, most polls show that Britons are happy to pay higher taxes for better public services. He doesn't even want to do that. The Green promise was such an inspiring promise, he stepped back from it. And it is because, in one way, and only one way, I feel I can't blame him, because 90% of our press, my industry, is rabidly right-wing. We do not have a fair and representative press. And whatever people think that nobody's reading newspapers, all the broadcasters wake up in the morning and take their cues from what the newspapers are saying. So if a newspaper says, we want 1% tax on the very rich, and if 5 newspapers say it over a week, you'll soon see all the broadcasters echoing this. And what we need is courage. We need courageous people in politics. So this week's column, I did kind of make did a thought experiment. I said, come with me. Let's say that so they were all hysterical about George Galloway. I don't like him. I don't respect him. But hey, he won. And he won without the backing of billionaires, which both our big parties have. Really, some of them quite shady billionaires. And he won it without the right-wing press on his side. He won it by talking to the people. He went and talked to the people. And the person who came second was even more impressive, a man with a car repair shop, who came second, got far more votes than Labour, Tory, or Lib Dems. Talked to the people. So I said, wouldn't it be great if we had, say, 50 to 60 truly independent MPs in Parliament? And so be it. If it's George Galloway and Nigel Farage, neither of whom I can stand, we'll take that. If we also have a whole selection of truly independent-minded, ethical MPs who won't be manipulated, and they could make a difference to the votes because they can't be whipped or bullied. And the papers had more of a response to this column than any other column I've written in the last year. And even said that because people want something different. And I can't stand the way these party politics works, this loyalty tests and ridiculous things. And before I forget, because the earlier question you asked me about the 60s, it's in this book, My Settler's Cookbook, which is a memoir. And there's a very, very, actually a huge amount of information on what it was like just before independence, when Britain finally kind of had to leave the African nations, what the atmosphere was like, how we were exactly like the children of the West, idealistic children of the 60s. And it's a very lovely section, surprising section in the book. And I also said in the book, and the Exotic England, this book I talked about, the history book, I traveled to Egypt, Jordan, and India to talk to people about what they thought of England after all this time. And you know what? Again and again, even older people who had fought against colonialism would say this to me. Oh, but you know what? Yes, we didn't want England or France to rule over us. But and one of them, a great novelist in Egypt, he said to me, but we want your system. We want your parliament. We want your Magna Carta. And I was really touched by that people, and India was the same. You know, they said, yes, we wanted them out, but look at the corruption in our country. I wish we had what you have. Look what we have now. We've become a sordid, corrupt political entity. And that makes me so very sad.
Yes. So, well said to all of that. I particularly, I love the idea of having a parliament of independent minds willing to argue, and also possibly willing to look ahead with a vision, because I don't think any successful career politician these days looks further than the next election, or maybe the next appointment of to a cabinet position, or whatever their personal career objective is. Now, how you persuade governments to change the method of government, power to your elbow. You need to keep on the case, because that's going to be a battle of a lifetime, isn't it? I fear. Let's talk about something which comes out of what we've talked about there, immigration. Now, your growth depends on growing the economy. People in the UK are not having enough babies, it seems, at the moment, and we need to increase the population, increase GDP, etc., etc. But people are concerned about infrastructure and the social aspects of immigration being too focused, or whatever. Where are we up to? What's the long-term plan on immigration? I mean, you're an immigrant. If I go back far enough, I'm one of Britain's first immigrants, and we're a nation of immigrants. How do you is manage the right word? It probably isn't, but how should the process proceed in a way which is more harmonious and productive at the national level, but also at the personal level?
It can't happen, because our press and the Tories have got this idea, and it has always been this way. Always. When in trouble, blame the stranger. When in trouble, point to the immigrant. You know, it happened when we came. And when we came, although Ted Heath, who was Prime Minister, the Conservative Prime Minister, did try and palm us off. And remember, we were not refugees. We were all people with British passports. The term is really important, okay? We were not refugees. When they left their empire, they thought they could have a virtual empire by handing out passports like sweets, okay? Never imagining that any of those people would want to come here. But of course, you know, the kind of trouble they set up everywhere, from partition to whatever the dirty tricks of colonial governments, which still carry on. So they never, but you know, when we came, there was all this hoo-ha. People are carrying placards at airports saying, F off where you came from. We don't want you here. Ted Heath was an honourable politician because he said they're British and they will come. And all the papers were hysterical about that. But then look what happened. Most Ugandan nations got rich, became like Priti Patel, funded the Tory party, so now they love us. Jewish people were the same. The front pages of the Mail and the Express were horrible when Jewish refugees were fleeing mainland Europe. They were identical to the ones we see now. So immigration, it's the same old story. They need us, but they don't want us. And you can't make people have babies. And I always say to people, you know, I'm ferociously attacked by these awful people. And I say, Joel, listen, there are more people of British, this is a fact. You can get the fact from the Migration Museum in Lewisham, London. There are more people of British extraction living outside the UK than there are living in the UK. How many people listening knew that fact? There are also more American migrants in the UK than there are Jamaicans. This is official Home Office figures. How many of you know that? It's not about immigration. It's about the, in quotes, darkies. These people we don't want, these people on the boats, okay? But the legal immigration routes, we've had hundreds of thousands of Indians coming in, and the government isn't looking at that at all. I have no problem with who comes in, because if you give them a chance, if you let these asylum seekers, while they were languishing for a decision, if we could allow them to work, I mean, a group of them 2 weeks ago said, a number of us are dentists. Please let us fill your, shortage of dentists. Let us work. We keep them unworking, in despair, giving them 30, 40 pounds a week or whatever it is, and then we call them scroungers. It's a disgusting national habit. And then, you know, you go into the hospital. I've just come back from hospital this morning. I had a checkup. Every single person I dealt with, from the consultant to the receptionist, was a so-called outsider in that they weren't indigenous Britons. Without them, Chelsea and Westminster Hospital would shut its doors. And I just think if our media informed people better, you know, about not just the contributions, but how Britain has always been like this. There's a wonderful book called Bloody Foreigners by Robert Winder. If you've not read it, please do. It's always been the case when the Huguenots came, fleeing persecution in Catholic France. Here, everybody was raising hell about them. Their houses were burnt down. Poems were written. They're taking our jobs. We push them back onto the boats, onto the channel. Shakespeare wrote a wonderful speech in an unfinished play. And here is how it goes. I remember it because they were kicking up so much about foreigners. Grant them removed. Imagine you see the wretched stranger with the babies at their back and their poor luggage plodding to the ports and coasts for transportation. What had that got you? You had taught how insolence and strong hand should prevail, and by that pattern, not one of you should live an aged man, for other ruffians, as their fancies wrought, would shark upon you. William Shakespeare. This is not a new story, and nothing changes.
Well remembered, well quoted. We'll take a break in a couple of minutes. Let me just ask you something that flows straight on from that, though. You're of course absolutely right. This has been an issue in Britain from the founding of Britain. How's the multiculturalism response delivering? Has it improved our ability to live well together, or is it just another potential tripping point in progressing towards the perfect society?
Well, it's no, there's a natural multiculturalism is absolutely working. We have more intermarriages in this country than any other Western country. And this has gone on from 1550. So when Shakespeare wrote Othello, there already was a huge number of white women, often working class women in Liverpool, Cardiff, London, port cities, with black partners, black lovers, black boyfriends, and lots of mixed race children. J.B. Priestley did a tour of this country and writes very movingly about the mixed race children, the very different mixed race children in Liverpool and in Bristol. Okay. So there is the reality of it. You just take chicken tikka masala away and ban it in this country and see who's going to riot. It's not going to be the Indians and Pakistanis, because I don't like it. It'll be the white people, because this kind of multiculturalism is now in their blood. Okay. But then there is the policy making, and there are problems with some. There have been problems with some of that. The problem of and that applies to white people as much as it applies to non-white people, where you so want to protect the sentiments of a particular homogenous group, that the protection comes before anything else. When life is changing, borders are breaking down. So, there used to be a time when in council homes, you could give the property to your child. And that meant that no outsider could ever break into that social housing market. So they changed that, quite rightly, saying, no, this is social housing. One generation has it, but you can't pass it on. All right? And there were certain housing policies which were based on ethnic unities or whatever they liked it. And I think more or less those are going. Were also, I used to, before I became a journalist, I used to teach English as a second language to immigrants in the workplace and their homes. So I would go into factories, hospitals, care homes, into the homes of Asian women who were doing sewing for factories and so on, and teach them English. This is before I became a journalist, very late in life. And the government funded that. It was under the Manpower Services Commission. Margaret Thatcher came in and cancelled all of that. And then they started moaning that they're not speaking English. Well, if you live in a family where one person is working, English language costs a lot of money. Now you can get them on Zoom and it's different. So there were loads of things that could have been done and were being done. Actually, whatever you think of Ken Livingstone, and he was never the villain he was made out to be. Greater London, and certainly I know it happened in Manchester too, these big cities worked so hard to create a shared space for everybody. And you see the results now. Look at Manchester. Manchester is a totally different place from when I used to visit 30 years ago. So you can say that there were problems, and I certainly think, for me, the worst thing are faith-based schools. I would get rid of all faith-based schools tomorrow if I had money and power. All of them. The Christian, the Muslim, the Hindu, the Sikh, we don't want them. Maybe I should be an
Thank you. I think that's a good point to take a break. We've got Katharina Bielenberg ready to join us. I think she's going to chat to us for 5 minutes or so about her publishing career. I know she has a relationship with MACFEST and Kezra. I'm not sure you need any advice on the publishing front, Yasmin, but I'll be looking out. My novel's not going to write itself. So let me just introduce Katharina while we have a glass of water. She's a publisher at McElhouse Press and Arcadia Books, which are both imprints of Quercus Hachette Books. McElhouse Press publishes literary fiction, crime fiction, and non-fiction now exclusively, and I think this is the important point, in translation from 28 languages. One of the real pleasures of working at the Lit and Phil has been in later life to have the opportunity to expose myself to so much more information from different sources that I wasn't necessarily aware of. And I think the opportunity to read work from that's written in different languages, and of course inaccessible to every Englishman who's ever been born, to have that available in translation is a fantastic thing. So let's hope we can say hello to Katharina and ask her to talk to us for a few minutes.
Yeah.
And when we get back, we'll see if there's any questions from the audience.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ian. Thank you for inviting me to step into the interlude to give you both a bit of a breather. And, you know, it's a real honor to be in present company and also to be part of this fantastic festival. Yeah, so I'm a publisher of McElhouse Press, which is a kind of tiny imprint in the scheme of things. And a few years ago, we folded another imprint, Arcadia, into the list. We publish Kesra's lovely books. And Arcadia has always had, for 25 years, a tradition of publishing really outward-looking books from, you know, all areas of life. I think they were probably the first publishers to publish Black writers, actually, and had several imprints that did the same, and also sort of LGBTQ plus writers. So it was very naturally a very good fit for us. And our mission, I think, is to continue. It follows on very well from what Yasmin was saying about how to look upon immigration. And I think if literature has a mission beyond being pure entertainment, it really is to continue to persuade people to be outward looking, particularly post-Brexit. And my background is also not British. I wouldn't, you know, I moved here when I was 2 months old, so the immigration experience was not a conscious one on my part, and I've lived here all my life, but certainly from where my broader family is, I've always been looking out of Britain, actually. So for me to have this job is kind of a dream in a way, and it's always what I wanted to do. We publish also Andrei Kurkov, who's a Ukrainian writer some of you may have heard of. He's been in the press obviously quite a lot in the last couple of years, and a book called Grey Bees, which is about the grey zone, the Donbass region to the east of Ukraine, and the beginnings of this current conflict actually went back to 2014. And he wrote in a new introduction how he says, I remember how as a child I opened books about a country unknown to me with a sense of fear, but curiosity won over fear, and without realizing it, I became smarter with every book I read. And I think this is so key, actually, the fact that reading books from around the world just makes us simply smart. How else are we to understand the communities around us, and how else are we to welcome and accommodate new people into our communities if we have no sense of where they have come from in the first place? 2 years ago, we were also in the process of putting together a book with a fantastic charity called Untold Narratives. This book's called My Pen is the Wing of a Bird, and it was a collection that was brought to us by Untold, and it was the result of a years-long project working on creative writing in areas of conflict and post-conflict. So in Afghanistan in particular, in the case of this book, and they invited submissions from all over the country, outside Kabul as well. They were putting posters up in villages, and they got 300 submissions from women in Afghanistan, which they kind of boiled down and selected in the end 23 pieces by 18 women. And then, of course, in August 2021, the siege of Kabul happened, and there was a real panic at the charity, actually, that we would be exposing these women to risk because their names would be printed, the book would be published outside of Afghanistan. And the women themselves they said, no, we don't want to be anonymous. We will not be anonymous. We've had our voices suppressed so often now. We actually want to be fully published internationally, and it's been translated into Korean and Japanese, and extraordinarily, most recently, we signed a contract to have it published in Ukrainian. So this is sort of like, it almost feels like an incredibly sort of cyclical thing. And it just feels as though, you know, sadly or happily, conflict sells books. That sounds wrong. It's not a question of the commercialization of conflict at all, but it was heartening for me, at least, to see that, you know, 13,000 people in this country wanted to read those stories. And I learned a lot more from reading those stories by Afghan women than I had from any press reports or reading newspapers. So, and at the end of this month, we publish a book by a Palestinian writer, Husama Habayeb, called Before the Queen Falls Asleep, which some of you may have heard about on Open Book last Sunday. In fact, it was her father who left Palestine. They went to Kuwait, and then they had to leave Kuwait when the Gulf War happened, and moved to Jordan, and she now lives in Dubai. So it's in a way a story of kind of multiple displacement and immigration as told to her daughter. So yeah, I mean, I guess the strangest thing about this country is that we are so inward looking that I think only about 4 or 5% of the books that are published here are translated from other languages, which, if you think about other European countries, the proportion will be something like 30 or 40%. We have such a kind of muscular literary tradition in this country that it sort of drowns out all other voices. But actually, happily, the trend is going up. Actually, there are lots of brilliant independent publishers, particularly, who are doing fantastic work and publishing outward-looking books. And I think, you know, diversity in publishing is absolutely key to making, you know, to waving flags and making people understand a bit more about what happens elsewhere in the world. So, so anyway, it's a fantastic project to be a part of. And yeah, thank you for inviting me on, and thank you for listening. And I've been really enjoying the conversation between you two, Ian and Yasmin.
Thank you, Catherine. I'll come back for a minute while Yasmin settles down. And most interesting conversation you've been having. And I just want to take up something, Catherine, you mentioned about the Afghanistan situation. We hosted 2 women from Afghanistan, one sitting in South America and the other one sitting in Kabul, and they had a, you know, bookseller. As soon as the Taliban took over, panic mode, both women straight away got in touch with us, said, look, please remove all our images, all our videos. They really were in a state of panic. On the other hand, we were connected by artists who were in hiding and desperate to have their work. And so we've got a mission in MACFEST. I just thought I'd share this with you, to host Afghani women artists every year. Last year, we hosted 5 of them sitting in Afghanistan, in Kabul. Obviously, they were afraid to put their name out and also to show their faces. But what they did was talk about their experience and showcase their artwork. So MACFEST in particular is committed to Afghani women in the light of what's been happening, and particularly for the artist. This is just to add to your conversation.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I should say actually that of the 18 women, I think maybe 15 of them have left Afghanistan now. So they're spread out, Canada, Tajikistan,
Absolutely.
Stockholm, and having a quite different experience of trying to settle in other places and write about that experience. So it sort of engendered a kind of a different kind of creativity, I guess. But yeah, it's been an extraordinary project. And actually, what's extraordinary is that all these women have kept so closely in contact on WhatsApp. I mean, what an amazing tool. That a whole book is being published not by us but by Untold, which is a kind of, it's a diary that starts in the siege of Kabul in August 2021 and goes up to the present day, as they all, you know, are in different places around the world. But they're just amazing women. I mean, incredibly sort of resilient and resourceful. But yeah, a real struggle. Absolutely.
So I'll hand back to Ian. We have got a question in the chat. Maybe Ian, shall we take that question?
Yes, let's try that. If Yasmin is settled.
Yeah.
So it's a question. The one I'm seeing is from Fedust Tabazm.
That's the one.
Do you if you're ready for it, Yasmin, there's actually two questions. Maybe I'll read them both together because they might follow on. So do you think the immigration issue is really about the threat from a misunderstood faith with Muslims coming into the UK? And then the second question, which may link, is from Barbara Dresner, and that says, I wish we knew how to discourage discrimination, but I'm afraid we're just basically animals, aren't we? What do you think about that?
The first question, I think it would be a complete mistake to say it's about Muslims coming in, although the right wing, certainly the hard right, and certain think tanks here who are funded by hard right people in America. And if you want to know more about it, there's a very good book called Dark Money, and I can't remember the name of the writer. She did a study into how dark money is funding very right-wing organizations in the UK and the US, and they are all kind of insanely anti-Muslim. The people who are coming into this country on the boats, especially the so-called illegals, when all what they really are undocumented migrants, because there is no, and I'm going to say this very clearly, for the last 10 years, there has been no legitimate way that desperate people, refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants can get into the UK. There is no legal route. They got rid of it 10 years ago. So they've created a situation where everybody by definition is illegal. And they're not all Muslims. If you look at the list of countries where people are trying to come into Britain, many of them for family reunification reasons, which is guaranteed by the UN Declaration of Human Rights. The countries change. Once upon a time, you used to get, for example, say during apartheid, a lot of illegal migrants from on the list were South African black people. You don't get any of them coming now because their country has a lot of problems that it is secure. The main groups now are Syrians, and they're not all Muslims. Not all Syrians are Muslims. Eritreans, who are not all Muslims. Iran, which is a very problematic country, especially for females, and Afghanistan, which we went in, occupied, destroyed, walked away from. Okay, there were 20 years when we gave some of the citizens rights they'd never had, and then we just walked away. So I think it's really important to break this awful link that is being made by people like Douglas Murray, who's a right-wing thinker, that it's all about Muslims flooding in and destroying this Christian nation. And what's the word? The replacement theory in all of this. Nobody leaves their country willingly if they can live there and flourish. I didn't want to come here. I would have stayed, and I wanted to teach at the university. But the US, UK, and Israel managed to depose the elected president, and this is all in the official papers, you can look it up, and thought they would put a buffoon, violent soldier in power so they could manipulate him. And he killed 300,000 people, of his own people. So nobody leaves without feeling the desperate need to do so. Many years ago, it was people from Chile, from South America, who were the main, and Iran after the revolution. So it's not a Muslim story. It's a story of what the West often does. If we hadn't gone into Libya, whatever you thought of Gaddafi, the people of that country had a higher standard of living than any other African country. We went in without a plan, just like with Iraq, wrecked the country so it's no longer a nation, and many of those boats are coming over from Libya. So It is a situation where perhaps the West needs to question its own foreign policies and find a way of enabling people to stay where they are, not arm Saudi Arabia, not arm Kuwait, not arm Israel, not arm these countries, which then create the havoc. That's my answer to immigration. You know, so many people now, second generation even, of Ghanaians are moving back to Ghana, partly because, and this relates to the second question, many of them feel they've had enough discrimination and they're making amazing lives for themselves. Fashion designers, record producers, festival organizers have all gone to Ghana and loving it. If I could, if I was younger, I would move back to Uganda. So this idea that we're all coming here because we want that wonderful council flat in Lewisham is just nonsense. The second question, discrimination. Things are much better, I have to say. From the 80s, when my husband wrote a very important book called Black and White Britain, which was a study in discrimination. You know, how when you applied for a job, if you were white or black, what happened next? If you applied for housing, what happened next? Empirical evidence of how much discrimination there was. There still is, and especially against Muslims now. Because it's okay to hate Muslims because we have a government which hates Muslims, so why worry? Why bother? But I think things have got better. When I look at my children, my daughter has achieved amazing stuff after training in medical technology, biomedicine. She's, you know, head of a big department in the National Health Service. This couldn't, she's only very young, couldn't have happened 10 years ago. Discrimination because she was a woman, because she was brown would have stopped her. So things have got better. There are many more powerful people from Black and Asian communities who are now top of the game, top of the places. Unfortunately, some of them are like Suella Braverman, and I have no answer to what we can do about that.
I've got a question, Yasmin, if that's okay. Unless, Ian, you've got another one. Let me just first read one comment by Naima. She says, thank you, Yasmin, for voicing that any issues around immigration are not a reaction to Islam, Muslims. The huge notes were religious refugees, but not Muslims.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other question, shall I ask mine then? Ian, is that okay? Or
Yes,
have you...
please. Sorry, I seem to just lose a bit of signal there over the last couple of minutes. I saw Yasmin coming to an end, and then my connection went a bit blank. But I'm seeing there's comments, aren't there, from Naima Khan, thanking Yasmin for voicing the issues around immigration are not a reaction to Islam and Muslims. The Huguenots were religious refugees, but not Muslims. I suppose it helps if you are more able to blend your skin and your clothing, whatever, you blend into society. It makes life easier. But sadly, people who want to discriminate, they will find a label to apply. It's always easier to discriminate against a group than against a person. So if you're looking for somebody to criticize, why not Muslims? It's just the latest in a long, sad sequence of human nature, unfortunately. But there we go. So is that about as far as we go?
I've got one question to ask Yasmin.
One question?
Yes, certainly. Okay, so Yasmin, this event is part of our Muslim Women's Arts Festival. It's also part of our International Women's Week event. So any message, any observation, any comments regarding women at the moment, challenges? The theme this year is Inspire Inclusion. Anything to share on that? And if you have time, then quickly we can mention your latest project, your writing project that we were talking about earlier. Love to hear more of those. And we've got 5 minutes still.
Well, with International Women's Day, I move this way and that every year. One year I even boycotted it because I thought it had become such a middle class thing. But this year I'm particularly conflicted because I watched the documentary this week on Sarah Everard, and then in the year what has happened since her horrible murder by a Serbian police officer, and how the police then behaved towards women who were just gathered as a vigil to remember this murdered young woman who was just walking home. And there was an Asian woman just a few weeks after that who was just walking home. And the statistics are horrifying. Over 300 women have been murdered by men since Sarah Everard was killed. Most of them knew the woman. Then there's been a 10 to 12% increase in the number of rapes and domestic violence cases. So even in this advanced nation, the hatred of women and violence against women seems unstoppable. If anything, as more women make something of their lives and refuse to stay in their place, the violence against them seems to increase. And especially we know all about young women and young men and young boys being influenced by all these online influencers. Sorry, I never answered that question of yours. That this whole new group of people we call influencers who've done nothing but their lives, suddenly earning millions and becoming prophets in our kingdoms. I mean, you couldn't make it up. So I felt so dejected by that program. And then I thought about Afghanistan, which is a prison for females without parole. They are in prison. A girl child born now at this moment to the grandmother who's 80 years old, they are in a prison. And then I went to speak at the Malvern Festival of Ideas last Saturday and met this extraordinary young woman who's called Serlina Boyd. And she set up this magazine called Coco Girl for her daughter, because her little girl was being so horribly bullied in school that she took her out of school, started homeschooling her, and produced this magazine celebrating Black children's lives. And it's done so well, it's now going to America. And so after feeling this dejected, I thought, actually, you know what? We will come through. Women like this, younger women especially, they won't allow this to go on forever. So I have very mixed feelings about women, where we're at. We're in a better place than my mother's generation ever were. But the reaction against that progress is extreme. The abuse I get, the threats I get, and women in the public space get, shows that we're not safe. We're just not safe. And that upsets me immensely, because, when I started, I thought 10 years we'll be there, and of course history doesn't go in a straight line, does it? But I do know that younger women, I have such faith in them. They will get there. They will get there.
Thank you. Anything about your latest project?
Oh yes, the book I'm about to sign up to do, which took so long to get a publisher for. It's a book of forbidden love stories from the East. Because, we know all about the Western forbidden love stories, Romeo and Juliet, Tristan, Isolde, all of that. But most people in the West, especially, in America, but also here, know nothing about these fantastic love stories between a dancing girl and a prince in the Mughal court, or two desert lovers who died finding each other. I'm just going to do that. Some love stories.
Okay, I think we're nearly at the end of this amazing, amazing event. It's time for me to thank everyone. What can I say, Yasmin? You're absolutely incredible. Loved hosting you. And as always, really impressed by your life, your views, the experience you've had, and your honesty and candor in sharing them with us. It's been absolutely terrific. Thank you so much indeed. Thank you also to Katharina, my wonderful publisher, and I'm showing up my book now, Revolt. If you haven't got it, there's 3 of them there. And I've learned a lot about your publishing, your love of books, and all the other projects you're involved with. And it fitted in beautifully with Yasmin's topic. And of course, thank you for taking us, joining us
And
today.
what a lovely note to end on, love stories. Thank you.
Yes, I am a glutton for those,
Up a bit.
And Ian, finally to Ian. Ian, as always, you're a natural pro, terrific hosting, and nothing to worry about. You were saying, oh, so you did a really grand job as always. And I want
to. Thank you. Please let me take the opportunity to thank you, Kezia. It's a privilege to be invited twice by MACFEST.
No, you were wonderful.
It's on behalf of the Lit Phil, thanks to Yasmin for joining me in that conversation. We're supposed to be all about ideas and learning through conversation. It couldn't have been a better example than that. So, and from my personal self, of course, thank you. It was fun, and you can't do better than that, can you? Thank you so much, all of you.
Absolutely, it's been fun. And as I mentioned earlier, and I think Katarzyna mentioned earlier, this is a special event for us for many reasons, having Yasmin, but also it's a collaborative event with Manchester Lit PhilSociety, and it's an honor for us to do another event this year, and hopefully next year indeed too. Now I want to finally thank all our attendees, our audiences, including from around the world. We had a lady, Karen B. She joins us every year from America early in the morning. So it's truly global. So it's been a great attendance for your event, Yasmin. A reminder, as you can see, we've got a slide up, and from, how shall I say, from Monday, we are entering our Festival of Ramadan, and as always, we have wonderful 4 events. Every weekend, we do different things. This is the first one, Albanian Ramadan Delight, where we take you all the way to Albania, learn how they celebrate Ramadan, what sort of food they have, their culture, their custom. And this is with Lulu, one of our team members. And there'll be many more. So all the Muslim friends, colleagues who are here, Ramadan Mubarak, we enter that month soon, and Ramadan Kareem. And thank you so much once again, everyone indeed, for giving us your Saturday. And hopefully you enjoyed as I have. So good afternoon, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you. A pleasure and a privilege.
Thank you, Don, to you for all the wonderful work you've been doing, as well as my team, of course.
The very least we can do. Thank you.
Thank you all.